All right,
Hi,
there we go.
everybody. I'm sitting here with Jason Desentz, managing partner of HR advisory at FlowerHire. I would love to welcome Jason. And Jason, introduce yourself and talk to me more about who you are as an HR executive. What's your background?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that, Dave. Thanks a lot. Real excited about this topic. Yeah, my background is I always like to say recovering chief people officer, as I say, but I've been outside of cannabis. I spent 20 years, mostly in automotive industry as an HR professional, really having an opportunity to be in every spot of the HR human capital, area. But I've also had the privilege of working as chief people officer for 2 cannabis companies here in Michigan, in the Metro Detroit area, where I've experienced being in the seat and understanding the heavy compensation, the compliance areas. But the topic of compensation is always one of the #1 areas that we tend to get a lot with our clients, for sure.
So speaking of compensation, obviously as senior advisors, it's a lot of the work that we see a need for. What is the sort of biggest misconception about compensation?
Yeah, a lot of times when we get asked that question, the biggest misconception is people really just limit it to just base salary. Compensation is really a part of a total reward or total remuneration that an organization can offer. So what we try to do is make sure that organizations understand each component with that, meaning you have a base salary, you have a bonus structure, you also have equity if available. But the other piece that people always forget about is benefits, right? Benefits can be a significant portion of retention tool for organizations. And that is the biggest misconception, is that it's just base salary.
That makes sense. And it seems like probably an obvious question, but how do you view compensation linked to employee satisfaction? Is it the #1 driver of employee satisfaction?
Hit it on the head, Dave. Whenever you do, I've done multiple engagement surveys all across different industries, and the #1 thing that people are disengaged on tends to be around compensation, followed by the other 2, which is leadership communication and career development. But it's always leaded with compensation, and I believe it's because they don't understand, and the organization has not put together a total compensation package where employees can truly benefit from working at an organization.
So, what are the biggest risks for companies if they don't have an effective compensation philosophy?
Well, as we all know, is retention. Retention is the biggest risk that an organization faces if they don't have what I call an open and progressive compensation package to offer to their employees. It really has been one of the fundamental reasons, as you know, Dave, running the #1 recruitment service in cannabis, why people tend to leave is because usually the top 3 areas of disengagement, right, which is compensation. Leaders don't really have or don't allow folks to have a voice, right? So that leadership communication, and then followed by career development. But it always does start with compensation. And if employees are truly paid where they think it's a fair wage, I always say, that's always a fun thing to say, but at least in such a way based on and commensurate with their experience.
Understand. You mentioned retention as being an obvious benefit for having an effective compensation philosophy. What are the other benefits for an organization?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when one of the biggest questions when I was in cannabis was, I would always be asked, typically by my CFO, always tied to my hip usually, but they'd always ask me to run a payroll report by department percentage-wise, meaning what they're looking for is your expenses kind of get out of track, and your SG&A can really balloon if you don't truly have a formulated and a true market-based compensation philosophy that an organization can truly be competitive with. And so you're actually causing a lot of waste, in my opinion, and it hits that cash flow, right? That need is cannabis, as we all know. Cash flow is one of the huge things that is, it's kind of plaguing us all the time in this space. So I always say to folks that if you don't have an effective plan, you're not going to retain, right? And how do you develop people into bigger roles if they don't see that there's a track, meaning you have a base salary that is commensurate with the role. So if you go from a manager to a director, you usually can see that percentage increase, but also the other parts, right? It's that the bonus side can go up percentage wise, and maybe even more equity. And so you could truly lose your critical, roles like a grower, Dave, you know that it's one of the smallest pool of, folks we have to deal with to use in this industry. And I feel like if we're not aligned as far as market pricing on what they should get paid based on experience, but then also internal equity. You can have folks and individuals, if you don't have a compensation philosophy, kind of infighting and saying, this person gets paid more than this person, because we all know people talk and compensation gets out. But if you have an open philosophy on your compensation, it's planned out, it's a no-brainer. You know what you're going to get at the next level. You know what those perquisites that are going to come with that. So it's important to have a plan, but also be transparent with that plan, and then allow people to really advance in their careers, and they have a goal as part of that plan.
So let's talk more about cannabis and doing compensation work right now. Like, why right now, going in 2023, going into 2024, is effective compensation design more important for cannabis companies than ever?
I mentioned cash flow. That's an easy one, but think about this. We're at the lowest unemployment rate, I think, in decades, right?
Post-war history.
Yeah, post-war history, right? So that means we're fighting for talent, right? So comp is one component of it, but at least if an individual feels that they're like, oh, wow, this is a great comp package, then you can actually get a good employee that focuses on process and growth as an organization. So what we're seeing is our folks are really asking us for a streamlined plan, because competition is fierce. And you want to be a leader, not a follower in this space as it relates to compensation. I'm not saying you're going to go well over as far as, how much, you're going to spend, but at least identify those critical roles to the business and make sure you have a solid plan for that compensation. However, also offer a good plan or people can feel that they have a strong career development in their future, and then they can see the perquisites that go with that.
I totally understand. And I guess talk to me about the process for doing compensation work with cannabis clients. Is it the same as doing compensation work for the automotive industry? Like, where is it different?
It's similar. We actually approach it from a 4-phase process. The first phase really being an evaluation phase, where when we work with our clients, we need to see what they have today. So we create a very secured location where they can put their data, because data is super important, but it's also super confidential. So we take pride in making sure that data is confidential, but we evaluate what their current situation is today and why they're structured in such a way and they pay in such a way. Then we really start to classify that. That's phase 2. And that classification really allows us to start looking at it and organizing the jobs, because org planning really is tied to compensation. When we look at comp, it's not just the numbers, it's also who reports to who. What kind of role is that? Is it exempt? Is it non-exempt? So that's phase 2, where we classify the data we got, and then we start to cut the data externally and internally. What does that mean? Well, that means we start to look at comparator groups, right? And that's phase 3. And that's when we start to compare that company's information to data size that's similar in scope and in growth and in markets to that particular client that we work with, where we say, okay, we're looking at revenue. We're looking at employee size. We're looking at multiple industries, especially externally, because there's no truly cannabis centric yet, except for what we offer at FlowerHire with all thousands and thousands of data sets that we've had. We've been in business for 6 years, right? So we've got so many data points about the cannabis industry, but we also need to compare it to the outside market, right? So we look at things like manufacturing organizations. We look at agriculture, retail, right? Retail is really important. And then we also look at a few other industries, even pharma or beverage, right? So we compare that. That's phase 3, where we've taken the data, we've classified it, organized it. Now we're comparing the data. against external market data points, but then also all that data set that's proprietary to us. We have an opportunity to truly see what, because we send those offers out. We see it. We know what organizations are offering, but we also know what's retaining those folks based on those offers too, which is really important. And then finally, phase 4 is that adjustment phase, right? Where as we report out to the organization that asked us to do a compensation study, we'll let them know based on the market data, which is both external and internal to cannabis. And the golden rule is plus or minus 10%, meaning there's a number or range that you'll find and calculate out, and you will tell them, we tell them by job, all the way from C-suite, all the way down to the hourly folks, where they can stand, whether it's plus or minus 10% to what the 50th percentile is. We provide the data in 3 data sets, the 25th percentile, which is the lower range, the 50th percentile, and then the 75th percentile. And then what we always suggest in cannabis today is that you're paying at the 50th percentile. And then if you need to go up or down, you can tweak it accordingly, but at least you know where you're at, right? And then we also look at other data points. Again, it's not just base salary. So it's bonus, it's equity. And then at FlowerHire, we go the extra mile. We also, with our clients, we look at other, remember that total rewards thing I talked about earlier? Well, we look at your benefit structure. Are you competitive on your benefits? Do you offer great, everyone always looks at medical, vision, and dental. But what we also compare is, do you offer short-term disability, long-term disability? Are you offering perquisites like, are you paying for cell phones for individuals that need it? Are there car allowances if required? So things like that. And then we truly give our clients a holistic look at all the things that they offer, including things like vacation. Are you competitive against your peers on vacation? We know all that. So we want to provide more information than not. So that way you as an organization are well prepared. So that way you're competitive against your peers.
Well, you know, it's refreshing to hear cannabis data, right? And if you think about, I've talked to groups several years ago that were using third parties to do compensation design work, and they were taking like manufacturing or retail, but FlowerHire has real proprietary cannabis data.
Yeah, we've got thousands and thousands of rows, Dave. And one great thing is we have actual access to it, but in real time. Most compensation surveys, those folks you're referring to outside, what they do is they look at the external market. So do we. But remember, that data point is usually a year old by the time you get it. But so keep that in mind. So it's a year old, and a lot happens in cannabis, right? In a year, we call it dog years. So it's like 7 years. So with that perspective in mind, it's already old data. And then what they do is they do what's called discounting, where they just take a percentage off of it, maybe up to 10% difference lower, because the cannabis market's still an emerging market. So it's not maybe on par with all the externals. But the cool thing that we get to do is we also have real-time data with all of our clients we work with. Obviously, we don't share any information, but we know across the scale, like what is a cultivation leader in Colorado on average make? What does supply chain director look like in Michigan or in Florida? And that is real-time stuff. So I can go back and look at our database, and we look at the most recent data points that we have, and we start doing comparators right then and there. So it's real data, and it's not a year old. So that's exciting.
So FlowerHire is known for recruiting and executive search. How did the HR advisory opportunity come about?
You know, I know that as FlowerHire was developing, we got asked quite a bit of, areas of focus in the human capital space outside of recruitment, right? Like organization planning, like benefits offerings, HR technology infrastructure. So, through the course of that, I actually was, I was a client of FlowerHire. I had the privilege of being a head of HR for a Michigan-based company. And I always had I always look for the top talent recruitment organization, and FlowerHire was definitely there for me. And, I think through the need of what FlowerHire was seeing and me being ready to help out more cannabis companies after, I think it was just a match made in heaven. And what we've decided to do was create an entire practice that just focuses on everything human capital. So while we still are the #1 recruitment firm in this space, we are now the #1 human capital advisory firm with everything else that happens on the human capital cycle, including audits. We do a lot of audits, right? That because a lot of companies today, it's compliance, compliance, compliance. And thank gosh, we've been working with some companies because, you know, we're all moving fast in this industry. It's pace, precision, right? And I think sometimes, unfortunately, things get overlooked. And you know what happens in cannabis? You can get fined, right? If you don't properly classify employees, you don't have the right paperwork for I-9s. But the difference in cannabis that can cost companies is their license. That's different than when you're external. When I was an HR lead outside of cannabis, a license today, as we all know, is like one of the most expensive things in cannabis that a person can do. And then it could also be your revenue. In fact, it mostly is. So that's why it's important that we've created this practice to really help the organization today to, you know, stabilize, but then also be a part of it, to be a part of its growth and how exciting it is. I mean, we're doing quite a bit of work.
Yeah, there comes a time after, you know, to do more to support the hardworking executives in cannabis, you got to help the HR processes within their companies they work for.
Right.
Thank you so much, Jason. Last question I have for you is FlowerHire and other companies that do recruiting and staffing for cannabis come up with salary guides, you know, which can be helpful. But tell me about the difference between a salary guide put together by, you know, Cannabis or Vankst or FlowerHire versus actual compensation guidance from the FlowerHire advisors team.
Yeah, a guide allows you to look at the overarching maybe range of certain roles, which, don't get me wrong, it's great to have, but it doesn't give you strategy. It doesn't tell you where to start. It doesn't show you where you're going to potentially have better retention. So guidance really allows an organization to have a roadmap. And that's really what the main difference is creating and working with an organization as part of that guidance and really creating that trajectory roadmap. Because the #1 thing that we hear all the time, Dave, is where do we start? And with a guide, it's static. So it's printed, it's great, but that's all it is. Guidance is like, you know what, here's a guide, here's some additional information, but here's where you start. And here's where you should start thinking about spending money first and or organizing your organization structure. Because in some cases, people think it costs you to spend money on comp, and it may not, because you may be doing a reorg because you're inefficient and have duplicative roles, but that's something we also discover as part of our plan. And so in some cases, it could be cost neutral. I'm not saying it all, but it could be. So that's what the difference in my mind is between a guide and guidance. It is really that roadmap.
I agree with that sentiment. And also the fact that there's such a diversity of location of where cannabis jobs are that a guide is a snapshot that may have some valid data behind it. But if you want guidance based around your company size and your location of which you're hiring employees, that's a whole different matter to do correctly. And that's where FlowerHire advisors and yourself and the team come in.
Absolutely. We're here and ready. We love this industry. Everyone is in it, is, really trying to grow and really make it, into its professional organization as it is. And we're going to continue to be here and be a part of it.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.